Hello, viewers. Well, as you know, I always enjoy any opportunity to compare notes with interview guests who have, like me, scrambled their way out of fundamentalist ideology and into freedom from religion. Today's guest is just such a person. Seth Andrews is a former fundamentalist Christian who now hosts the well-known Thinking Atheist podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome him onto the John Cedars channel for this interview. Seth, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here, man.
Happy to have you here because I know you recently hosted me on your channel, so it's great to reciprocate.
You give me hope. You know, I'm not the only guy who took a long time to escape the faith. You know, I was in my late 30s before I got serious about it, and I punish myself daily. You know, what's the matter with you? Why didn't you see it sooner? Aren't you smarter than this? So when I see somebody who emerged late in the game, it always gives me hope. I'm not the only one. So,
well, that's good. I mean, like you say, people. The thing is with religion is that it can have such a stranglehold on you, and it can keep people for years or decades longer than they would ideally like to wake up.
yeah, I find myself too surrounded by a reinforcement. I mean, everybody, my mother and father, my sisters, my brother, my neighbors, my coworkers, everybody was some flavor of God believer. It was just I mean, I didn't know any atheists that I was aware of. There's a church on every half block. There's Christian universities everywhere. Everybody, the first three questions they ask you: what's your name? What do you do for a living? Where do you go to church? We just, you know, the idea of not believing was just a foreign language. And it's a scary time, you know, when you come to the point when you begin to realize that all that you used to assume, all that you were indoctrinated with might not be true. I mean, that's scary stuff, you know.
And I want to, if possible, drill into that a little bit with you, because obviously I get to speak to a number of people, but especially when it comes to those who haven't been Jehovah's Witnesses, who haven't been raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, and those who don't know about that religion, I usually find myself speaking to people who just don't know what it's like to deal with all that. So let's start off with my first question, which we have touched on a little, but I'd like you to kind of go into it in a little bit more detail. Tell us about your background as a believer.
Well, my mother and father are fundamentalist Christians. They're both still living. Mom's 79, dad's 82. My mother teaches to this day New Testament Greek.
Wow.
They met at Oral Roberts University. They honeymooned in Jerusalem. You know, they are not Sunday Christians. They were always from day one hardcore Christians. So they raised us around Christian stuff. We had Christian coloring books and Christian games and Christian music, and this was the fabric of our life, you know. And I remember I came home from homeroom class, third grade at Sandburg Elementary, telling Mom about something I'd learned about Neanderthal man. This is something that's not in the Bible. And of course, before I knew it, I and my siblings were all in private school, Christian school. So I finished my education all the way through my senior year in private Christian school. I ended up a natural communicator. So before I knew it, I was a broadcaster. I was an Christian FM radio host for about 12 years and had real success in my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma as a Christian broadcaster. My family was hugely proud. Our son is doing God's good work. He's a minister in his way of the gospel, using his gifts, and we couldn't be prouder. And after that, I got a job in video production, doing mostly church videos. That started in 2004. And, you know, I'm finally getting close to 2006, 2007, and just, I don't know, I just started to tap on the glass a little bit. And before I knew it, the whole thing just came tumbling down.
Wow. I can't believe it's that recent because, you know, I kind of came into this sort of 2011, 2012, and by that time you were kind of like almost a household name. So I can't kind of picture you as being quite so recent with all of it.
Oh, it was. Yeah, it was recent. I started the journey of questioning in 2007. I said the word atheist in regard to myself around 2008, and I launched the thinkingatheist.com in 2009, mostly because I just kind of wanted to get it off my chest. I had so much I wanted to say. I had this naive belief that, man, if people could only understand, could only find and discover the information that I just discovered, they'll walk away from their faith in droves and be set free. I mean, it's so naive that, people are going to want to know this. What I discovered was most Christians don't remotely want to know it. They're terrified of new information that might contradict their cherished beliefs. I also wanted community because, here I am in Jesustown, Oklahoma. I didn't have anybody. And so I was looking to reach out and create an online sort of place, a hub where people like myself could come and hang out and connect. I started the radio podcast in 2010 and it took off. So I guess a lot's happened in a short amount of time, but it is, relatively speaking, pretty recent.
I must just as well just go back to what you said about your mother teaching, was it New Testament Greek? Because my mother, this is something that my viewers don't know, but my mother actually spent about a year living in Greece. And she learned Greek. And that was always kind of a thing in our family, that she had that connection to the... she didn't make a big deal out of it. She did every now and then work it into her answers at the Kingdom Hall meetings. If there was a scripture and she'd done some research on a particular Greek word, she could speak about it with a bit more authority. But I just find it interesting that your mother and my mother would probably have been able to have quite an interesting conversation.
Oh, yeah. And, you can twist you can make the Bible do anything you want in the Greek or the Hebrew or in any translation sense. And the Bible's a very malleable book, I've discovered. Whatever you want the Bible to mean, you can probably find a way to make it mean that. And apologists are really good at this. So.
Indeed. So, could I ask, what's your current relationship with your believing family members? Are they horrified at the work that you're doing?
Yeah. What's our relationship? It sucks. That's what the relationship is. It's not good. Forgive me, I'm getting over, I'm on the back end of a cold and I'm sniffling just a little bit. And I have this, I do this chai tea thing with a little honey and it's amazing. But, so I'll forgive the sniffles here. But when I started with my parents, when I started to test the waters, I started with questions. Like I didn't want to freak them out. Back in 2007, I'm like, they're the experts. They're theologian level believers. So let's ask them some specifics about Adam and Eve in the garden and Noah's Ark and 900-year-old humans and flying chariots of fire and the Nephilim and blood magic and all these other things. And, the historicity of Scripture and the authorship of the Bible and blah, 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 blah. And the increasing avalanche of information I was getting about the sciences, about the cosmos and evolution. And so I began to ask them questions. Well, of course, it didn't take them long before they're like, oh, wait a minute, danger. Wait, one of our children is starting to ask these hard questions. He's not taking it on faith and he's not taking our word for it. And so they began to panic. And when I finally said I was an atheist, Mom was heartbroken. It was a phone conversation. She's like, you're not an atheist. And I'm like, yes, I'm an atheist. She's like, you may not believe, but you're not an atheist. I'm like, I'm an atheist. Yeah, I don't believe in God. And it's been hard because they see it as a rejection of them. They see it as a rejection of sort of my responsibility as a believer, a former believer, to carry the torch. They're embarrassed. They feel like they failed as parents. The idea that I'm an activist is hard because they know I'm very public about my disagreement with them on religion, and they feel like I'm the prodigal that must be brought home. And so we've had just a litany of arguments and emails and texts, and at this measure, we don't really speak. We don't have much of a relationship. We may see each other on the holidays, but that's about it.
So it's not all that dissimilar, frankly, to the impact it's had on my family. Obviously, Jehovah's Witnesses, it's kind of codified the shunning for Jehovah's Witnesses, but it sounds like you're experiencing it pretty much anyway.
Some of it is self-imposed. Let me back up. I'm a believer in boundaries, and I've had this conversation with my radio audience quite a bit. There is a narrative on some people's family tree that, you are my child. Therefore, I get the chance to, even when you're an adult, I get to say what I want. I get to interject myself into your life. I get to step into your house, over your threshold, and get into your affairs and tell you how to live. I'm your parent. We didn't raise you this way, kind of thing. And I'm completely against that. I believe that people have every right to establish personal boundaries and decide to live their own lives on their own terms. There's an expectation from moms and dads that, hey, we raised you to be like me, dress like me, worship like me, vote like me, carry on the family torch, carry the mantle. And of course, they're disappointed when that doesn't happen in some cases. But I'm a believer in boundaries. And, whenever I found myself constantly confronted with, you're an embarrassment, you're broken, you're bringing shame, you're hellbound, you don't want to go to hell, and all these threats and types, I finally realized that I in my own life needed to draw the boundary. I needed to draw a hard line and say, I love you, you are my family, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but you simply don't have permission to act in this way. And so if you aren't going to respect my right to live my own life and respectfully disagree, I'm going to have to lock you out.
Yeah.
And if that changes, if you can conduct yourself with graciousness and goodwill, and if we can live around our differences and be parent and child, I want that desperately. But for them, nothing else can be enjoyed unless the eternal question is solved. And I understand. I mean, they're all in. I mean, they're completely bought into the idea that eternity awaits one way or the other, and they want to save me. And I'm hoping one day I have this sort of pipe dream that one day we'll be able to just hang out and kind of laugh about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're wired that way. I think they are, they got to fix me. And I think it kind of betrays an insecurity about their own belief in God's power. Like they believe in the power of prayer, and Jesus has already defeated the devil, and Jesus can do anything. And he answers prayer. Well, have you prayed for me? Yes. Do you believe Jesus can save me? Yes. Do you believe Jesus can convince me? Absolutely. Well, then what are you worried about? Right? I mean, it's in Jesus' hands. If he's all that, why are you so flipped out? I think they really, without realizing it, betray a tremendous insecurity about their own belief system.
Indeed. Well, this completely resonates with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with many people listening to this interview who are themselves in exactly the same situation as you and I are in. I just find it astonishing because, well, let me explain it this way. If you were to say to your parents, I'm coming back to the fold, I'm going to be a believer again. Let's not, drill down too deeply, but I'm going to come back to church. I'm going to make all the right noises. Will you accept me back? Probably they would. And they wouldn't be too interested in whether you're sincere or not. And that's what I struggle with in my situation, is that with my dad, he would probably be perfectly happy if I go through the whole reinstatement process and just feign this declaration that I believe in the faithful slave and what have you, irrespective of what I personally think. And I find that appalling that he's not interested in whether it's in my heart or not. Does that make sense? Yeah.
No, I think it does. There would be a sigh of relief. Hey, at least he's walking the walk.
Yeah.
At least he's, at least he's going through the right motions. My parents would just be, I would be, they'd slay the fatted calf the prodigal had come home,
There'd be street parties in Oklahoma.
They just don't process it very well, and my heart breaks, and it's one of the reasons that I do what I do, because I see the damage that religion does to our models of love and acceptance. I mean, essentially what they have in some ways demonstrated. I know that my parents would give their lives for their children, I understand, but there's a flavor of love that is withdrawn unless you agree. My father, I think, believes per scripture that, he's not supposed to fellowship with the unbeliever. And so if we're too tight, if we enjoy each other's company too much, if we're too close, it's like he's sort of de facto endorsing me. He can't let me in too far, or else it's like he's signing off and he agrees. And I'm like, well, that's not how the adult world works, man. We can totally disagree. And religion damages, it perverts otherwise healthy notions of love and family. And I see this story repeated time and again in my inbox as people talk about being cast off from the people they thought had their backs. They were confronted with what they now realize is an absolutely conditional love. So.
Absolutely. Well, you've actually partly answered my next question, because my next question was going to be, some would argue that there isn't anything harmful about being a fundamentalist Christian, and they might feel that to forge a career out of criticizing religion is unnecessary. What would you say to that? Well, you've kind of already answered that question.
I actually wrote a blog on this years ago called "Why Can't You Leave Religion Alone?" And the gist is for me that the only reason atheist activism exists is because religion exists. I mean, you don't find a Richard Dawkins book in the hotel rooms. You find a Gideon Bible.
Yeah.
You don't have atheist evangelists knocking on your door telling you that there is no God. You've got religious people showing you up and inviting you to church. And, you don't see atheists going and trying to brainwash your children with the fairy tales and old mythologies. You don't see atheism hiding behind tax shelters, the tax shelter of the church. I mean, religion has gone largely, with some exceptions, unopposed. It's just owned the narrative for thousands and thousands of years. It's, in so many cases, been behind the government, and it's been part of a culture that it's just been able to say and do whatever it wants because it is religion. And so I think it is now so big and so established and so well-funded, the best way to go after it is to organize. And people then are ready in the church to be like, well, if you organize, you're just another religion, which is ridiculous. Or if you come together as a community, you're just another church, which is ridiculous. Or if you make a living, you're a sellout, which means that any pastor who ever genuinely believed his Bible but accepted a salary is a sellout. Anybody who does what they're passionate about for a living is a sellout. It makes no sense. All the criticisms completely just fall apart. And while I love what I do, and I love the fact that I can do it full time, wouldn't it be amazing if one day we do have a world where atheist activism doesn't have to exist because superstitious thinking and claims have become so marginalized that they're not infecting our children. They're not banging on our doors threatening hell. They're not dividing families. They're not tainting science books. They're not rampant in government halls that should be free, that should be protected by church-state separation. It'd be great if religion came to the point where they were kind of the flat earthers. They exist, but, we don't talk much about it. I'd love to see that happen. I'd love to make myself obsolete in that way. But the work is far from over, and I'm fortunate to be able to do what I do with all of my efforts and energies. I'm glad to be here.
Isn't there a tremendous irony, though, in this sort of underdog mentality that religious people have? Because probably it was the same thing for you when you were growing up. I grew up with this mentality of, the world is dominant and the world's getting worse and worse and worse, and people are encouraging you now to think of homosexuality as normal, and evolution's being pushed and pushed and pushed, and we're the underdogs. And it's only when you get out that you realize, actually, you're not the underdogs. You guys have had the run of the place, basically, for centuries.
What is that line that says, oh God, I want to do justice to this quote. When you've been used to a monopoly on the discussion, equality feels like oppression is kind of the general gist. Yeah. Well, you and I are coming up on the holiday season, right? Well, we're getting ready for the Fox News War on Christmas thing, and I'm sure there's a war on Christmas in other parts of the world. This is amazing to me, right? The people who every holiday season claim that they are under attack get to put crosses and baby Jesuses and angels, and they get to play music, and they get to decorate their homes inside and out any way they want. They can worship at their Christmas services. They can go any day of the year and worship their specific deity in whatever way they please. They can send their kids to Christian school. There's a good chance their elected politician holds their particular faith. They have absolute religious protection under the Constitution, and yet they continue to tell us that they're the ones who are being oppressed. It just blows my mind. And one of the reasons that this narrative exists is because I think it has to exist. In the Bible, Jesus commands his followers to be persecuted in his name. What happens if you're commanded by Jesus to carry the cross, to go do battle as a crusader in God's army, and you live in one of the most religiously protected nations in the world? Well, what happens then? Well, I guess we'll have to manufacture the crisis.
Yeah.
So now it becomes about, they want to take down a religious thing on taxpayer-funded property. This is an attack on us. Or someone else has an opposing point of view, or they criticized me publicly. This is an attack on our Savior. My own father said to me once when I'd sent him I was just having fun, but I've got these mockery sort of memes of Jesus. Jesus jokes always make me laugh, and I was just kind of irritated. So I sent him a picture of Jesus with a crown on his head, the crown of thorns, and it says, "Hey, Dad, I'm a cactus." Well, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. And but I'm trying to show him that I'm not afraid. Like, I'm not afraid anymore. And he's like, "You persecute Jesus, you crucify Jesus every day." And I'm like, how can an invincible creature be persecuted?
Yeah.
This makes absolutely no sense to me. And yet, because they're commanded to be persecuted, I think they play that card any chance they get. I'm a victim, poor me. That also in many ways insulates them from criticism. And they don't get to be insulated anymore, especially in the information age. You make a claim, you better brace yourself, because we're going to go check it out.
Yeah, I mean, persecution was a huge thing for me, or still is a huge thing for Jehovah's Witnesses. They thrive on it. And it's like you say, because of that scripture, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. Yeah. And Jehovah's Witnesses go around telling each other, well, if we weren't being persecuted, we wouldn't be God's one true faith. So it makes sense that people are mocking us and deriding us, and in various countries our work is under ban. They absolutely lap it up.
We were talking about the aftermath, actually before and after Hurricane Irma had hit Florida and just did some tremendous devastation. There's a group of people, several dozen people, go out on the beach, and they're all praying in advance of the storm, calling down God's miraculous power to keep the hurricane away. Well, you and I know what's coming. There's a damn hurricane. It's coming. And so the same people who were praying the hurricane away saw absolutely no result, and this meteorological event played out as it would, as we were able to predict. And the people in the news media who posted the story about their claims and prayers and praises didn't do a follow-up. And I'm like, where's the follow-up to the story? Why not go back to these people and ask them, hey, wait a minute. Where's the power of prayer? Where's the Bible promise that you had named and claimed? Nobody was there to ask them why God had disappeared. It's an interesting thing. God seems to look and act much like a natural world would without God's intervention. Go figure.
It is astonishing, actually, the level of religiosity in America. You probably don't notice it quite so much, but I obviously grew up in the UK, which is, I think it's safe to say, more secular.
Now, how does that work, though? I mean, I know you've got the Church of England, but it's more of an institution, right? It's not like you guys don't really talk about religious stuff, right? Yeah.
Well, that's the irony, is that you guys in America have a more secular constitution, or a secular constitution, but more religiosity. And it's the reverse in the UK. We have a non-secular constitution where the Queen is the head of the Church of England. She's the head of the state and the head of the church, and yet it's quite a secular country. In fact, I think there's been figures recently released that indicate that non-believers are now in a narrow majority.
Aren't they repurposing some of your churches for that reason? They're just
you always hear about that kind of thing, about churches having to be turned into homes and that kind of thing.
We got churches, we got crosses, we've got evangelists, we got enough religion to go around here in the States, man.
Oh, well, that's the thing. I mean, the religion that dictated so much of my life came from America. And what's interesting is that my wife and I were visiting in 2013, and we were visiting some friends in Tucson. And they let us use their car and drive to San Diego along the Mexican border. So it was quite a long road trip. And during that time, we were tuning into the radio. And of course, every other radio station was Christian music.
Mm-hmm.
And we were seeing all these bumper stickers and billboard signs about Jesus and that kind of thing. And, I just turned to Deanna and said, only in America could Jehovah's Witnesses have been born, because there just isn't that much fervor for religion in the UK. I can't imagine Jehovah's Witnesses getting up and running back in the late 1800s in the UK. I think it had to have been in America. I don't know why that is.
We love us some God here. Just pick a God. I just got back a few weeks ago from the Ark Encounter, which is a supposed recreation or replica of Noah's Ark of Genesis.
I noticed. I was going to ask you about that, actually, so please go on about... No, please. Yeah.
Ken Ham hails from Australia, but he lives in Kentucky, and he's an apologist and an evangelist, and he's just been out there preaching nonsense to children. He's a young earth creationist. He believes the earth is younger than the Sumerian civilization. He believes in a literal 6-day creation. He believes that, we walked and hung out and frolicked with dinosaurs, and that there were dinosaurs on the ark, and he believes in a literal ark story. So we went, and Matt Dillahunty and I and several others from Kentucky Free Thought went and toured the ark, and it's just a monument to insanity. He's got dioramas of pre-flood evil Earth humans who were fighting against dinosaurs in a coliseum, and he's got dinosaurs in cages, and he's got these apparatus where 8 people could feed tens of thousands of animals and shovel out the tens of thousands of tons of animal waste, and it was just a nightmare.
But of course, it would have had to. They use thousands, but it would have had to have been millions, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Unless they're going to advocate a greatly accelerated form of evolution.
Well, and he's real sneaky. He uses words like kinds. There's this kind and that kind and these kinds, and then he becomes squirrely with the definitions. But you're absolutely right. And Matt and I had this conversation that he actually is advocating a sort of a Cambrian explosion of evolution right after the animals disembarked to create all of the diversity that we would see today. And I walk out of there and I'm like, welcome to Kentucky and welcome to the United States of America. And it's maddening. And, the lack of curiosity, when you challenge someone to defend the Noah's Ark story, someone who has grown up to believe it, I would love to live in a culture where they're like, hey, wait a minute, there's some problems with it. Well, let's have coffee. Tell me what you found out. I'm genuinely curious because I want to know what's true. I'd love for that to be the case.
Yeah.
But more often than not, what I find is, why are you persecuting me? Or why are you so angry? Or you're listening to the wrong voice, or you're going through a midlife crisis, or any number of excuses why the messenger, they come after the messenger now, should not be listened to. And I think, where's the discovery? Where's the curiosity? And that's one of the beautiful things about leaving the faith. Instead of starting the day with the answer with a capital A, I get to go out and ask questions. And if I find a better argument, I get to embrace that new information and discard the old one. I get to make every day a kind of adventure, kind of a discovery. And I'm so thankful for that fact.
Oh, you wouldn't trade it for anything. And
never.
That's the thing. The reason I wanted to ask you about the Ark Encounter, because obviously I knew that you'd been around it. And, Jehovah's Witnesses take the Noah's Ark story very seriously indeed. In fact, there's a public talk outline. So every Sunday, witnesses go for their what's called a public talk at their Kingdom Hall, and they basically rotate through the outlines, and the outlines are written for them by the governing body. And one of those outlines is specifically about the flood of Noah and why we can believe it. Yeah, so they really do drill it into you. And as far as the Ark Encounter is concerned, if a Jehovah's Witness was to visit, they would take issue with the shape because they believe it was a square, rather it was a box rather than a boat. Yeah. They would take issue with the dinosaurs because they're just not quite that batshit crazy. But apart from that, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in young Earth creationism, as in the Earth is 6,000 years old. But they're not a great deal removed from that. They're still creationists, and they still believe that 4,000 years ago, literally every centimetre of the planet was inundated with water. So I would be fascinated to take a look at it one day.
I love watching Christianity talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses and other cults, right? Like, let's be honest, Christianity is a cult.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's a death cult.
Yeah.
Because it focuses on death and another life after death, and we look forward to the day we shuffle off this mortal coil, and one day we'll fly away, and when he comes, and all those. I mean, we're all going to be in heaven today. This life is pain, and the next life is paradise. It's a death cult, okay?
Sure.
Selling itself as sort of a love enterprise. But, when people talk about when I was in the church, the Jehovah's Witnesses, those people are nuts. They got some crazy ideas. And, the Mormons, Joseph Smith, and he had the eyeglasses and the magic rock, the seer stone, and he did the golden plates. And then Jesus came to, I know, that's crazy. And you see the Scientologist, Xenu, the intergalactic overlord, that's crazy. But the people who believe that a divine wizard made a dirt man and a ribbed woman in a enchanted garden with talking animals, and there was a floating zoo and 900-year-old humans and all these other things. That's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
A divine God impregnated a teenager with himself for the purpose of sacrifice. It's just all these weird stories that we accepted as normal because they were what we were raised with, what we'd always known. And I always find it interesting to watch religions talk about each other.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I'm trying to do on my channel. I'm trying to compare religion. So I've already done one video where I sit down with a former Mormon and we kind of compare notes. I think if I was going to try and compare Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses with kind of Christianity in general, and it's worth pointing out that there's lots of differences between Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, the theology is poles apart in many respects, but if I could find one aspect in which we're more or less the same, it's that both Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses have founders or leaders in fairly recent history who they point to as being, representatives or spokespersons for God. That's not necessarily the case in other branches of Christianity. I mean, okay, the Catholics have the Pope, but your average Christian in America, when they're thinking of their religious heroes, they're thinking of Bible characters. They're not necessarily thinking of people who literally only died a few decades ago.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very true. I find that, honestly, the Jehovah's Witness and Mormons are hugely, I don't know why, I always sort of associate the two. I know they're very different. In fact, I wrote about the Mormons in my book, Sacred Cows. We were talking a little bit about...
Well, our mutual friend did the illustration for that, Vincent DePorter.
Oh, yeah,
he's a good
Vincent.
friend of mine, yeah.
Well, Vince is a master illustrator who's, he's done DC Comics and a bunch of other stuff, but he's also a talented artist who was hoping for an opportunity to lend his gifts. And it's like he crawled in my brain, man, because I was like, look, I kind of need it to look like this, and this. And then he'd come back from his little lair. Sure. And it would be amazing. And I'd be like, how did you do this? It was what I'd hoped and much more. So, but yeah, it's funny. I'm always talking about the Mormons and then the Jehovah's Witnesses, kind of a 1-2 punch there. It's weird.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad that he was able to help you. I've seen some of the artwork that he did for you, and he's a really talented artist.
Very much.
I want to kind of drill down. I mean, you mentioned that you've only really been involved in the atheist activist community since, basically for the last 10 years, more or less. Has anything changed, would you say, in the atheist scene since you began your work?
Well, I've changed. I'll speak to the movement too, but when I first busted out of the faith, I was frustrated. No one was listening, and I was a bit angry at all the time I'd wasted. I was angry that I had not been exposed to better ideas and the real world. I was angry at myself for taking so long to figure it out. I was a lot more sharp, a lot edgier. You can see that in a lot of my earlier work. Very sarcastic stuff like the story of Susie and other videos that came out. They're less compassionate. And I don't apologize for them. I think I stand by them. But you can see that as my work's evolved, I've tempered a bit. I've focused more on trying to help people, seeing many of the religious people in my circle as victims. Granted, the ideas are still ripe for ridicule, and we often ridicule them. But there's a lot less anger in my tone because I've been able to step far enough away to be able to do that reset and then think, well, I'm not going to shout somebody into better ideas. I'm not going to insult them into letting go of their superstitious chains. How in the world can I be a positive and productive part of their world? And for me, that a lot of that has been just to be a loud, proud, secular person in full view. I mean, to show them the antithesis of this stereotype that atheists are sad and rudderless and have no purpose and they have no joy or laughter and you just suck the marrow out of every day. They can't have a truly good life. You know, I'm a living reputation of that, and I totally screw up their categories. And it's nice to see people go, well, you're nothing like what I expected. And then they're coming to me instead of me accosting them. They come to me and they want to know more. The movement itself, I mean, it's in a state of evolution. It has its ups and downs. At first, when I first got in, there was a lot of religion is stupid. You know, it was really kind of the rampant message, which is a pretty easy shot. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, religion is just a dumb idea. But there was a lot more insults toward the people who were believers, which I resisted. Religious people are not necessarily stupid people. A great many of them are hugely intelligent people. They're just victims of bad ideas.
Do you think that's something you need to have been a believer to understand, though? Because I get that impression sometimes.
I think not necessarily to understand, but I think certainly to fully empathize.
Yeah.
You know, when Matt Dillahunty was going to be a Baptist minister, he was not an idiot. You know, I mean, from the Human Genome Project, the scientist name Francis Collins. Yeah. You know, he's a Christian. Yeah. And he's a genetic scientist. He's not a dumb person. He's an intelligent person. I was talking once to Michael Shermer on a show we did called Why Smart People Believe Dumb Things. And he had a great angle that spoke to how many people they outsmart themselves. Like, it's many times the most intelligent who can really tap dance themselves into an explanation for the unexplainable. They're often so clever, they outsmart themselves. But, you know, to throw insults and invective at people, you know, am I trying to make myself feel superior? Am I trying to puff myself up? Is this really about me, or is it about trying to help people? And the tone of my work has been more about that. I see a lot of that these days. The movement itself is going through some growing pains. We've got some unfortunate fringes. We've got some fights. We've got some, you know, there are various movements within the atheist movement. You know, there's the podcasters and the YouTubers and the bloggers and the speakers and the this and the that, and the scientists and the philosophers and everybody else. But I'm ultimately at the end of the day have high hopes that this will be kind of a galvanizing process that will see the best ideas and the best people win out. So
I know when I first woke up from my indoctrination as a witness, I think I was quite naive about the potential of kind of collaborating and kind of, you know, pooling resources with fellow ex-JWs, and just assuming that basically if you've made it out, you must be basically a decent person and friend material, and we're all going to get on and it'll be fantastic. And I think 6 or 7 years down the line, I'm far more jaded, and I feel as though just because we've had a shared experience doesn't mean that we're all necessarily have the same values. I mean, for example, you've mentioned about you know, people jumping up and down and hurling insults and that kind of thing. There is an element of that within the ex-JW movement. There is kind of that there are those who think nothing of harassing Jehovah's Witnesses in public or going into their meeting places and remonstrating with them and that kind of thing. And those that do that don't seem to take kindly to those like me who say, well, maybe that's not a good idea, that they don't really have a live and let live
they're actually working against themselves, right? They're actually producing a backfire effect, a belief reinforcement phenomenon, where these people then it plays right into their persecution narrative, and now they're going to double down. You know, they're actually working against their own interest if their interest is to change minds.
Sure, but it's interesting for me to hear that there's been a similar process in a way with you and the atheist movement, because maybe you went into it perhaps thinking, oh, you know, we're gonna take down religion and it'll all be fantastic, and then a few years later, you know, maybe reality's not quite like that.
Yeah, for me, I came to a relatively fast recognition that, you know, like I know some beautiful, amazing, wonderful Christians. I would trust them with my life. They're the best people I know. And there are some just tremendously horrible atheists. Right? I mean, you'll find good and bad people in any movement, any culture, any organization. And atheism, the atheist movement, however you choose to define it, is really no exception.
No.
You'll find good atheists who love people and want to be about truth and honesty, and they're generous in their hearts. And you'll find just awful people who want nothing more than to inflame and hurt. And it's, it's tragic, but it's true. Not all atheists are humanists. Not all atheists are rationalists. Not all atheists came to atheism for rational reasons. A guy who says the aliens told me there is no God, that person's an atheist, but they're not a rationalist. The person who just never thought about it. And so he's sort of a default atheist. Well, is he an atheist on par with somebody who has gone through a serious period of examination like yourself? And so, you just find that humans are humans, good and bad and indifferent, and we have to take them as it comes,
I agree. In fact, I applaud those sentiments. And I think that it's something that I touched on when I was interviewing Matt just the other day. He's gone on before you and basically said exactly the same thing. And, you reach through to people when you treat them like human beings and you don't assume the worst of them, and you do assume that they're intelligent. It's counterproductive to make any other kind of assumption, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and also I think if I automatically decide if this person's a God believer that I don't want a human connection with them, we're cheating ourselves. I think there are wonderful people out there who may have a God belief, who we may tremendously love and enjoy and could bring so much goodness into our lives. And it's when we have dialogue and can speak to each other that I think, that minds can be changed. But, Peter Boghossian once wrote in his book, Manual for Creating Atheists, and he had spoken to me in person about the idea that people change their minds from an environment of safety. And over the years, I remembered that, people, if they feel attacked, are going to double down and reinforce. But if they feel safe, if they don't feel like you're coming after them and insulting them and beating them over the head, if they feel like they're in a place where they can be themselves and be true to themselves, they are more likely then to lower the defenses. And man, that's when minds can be changed. Yeah. And I always assure them that if I've got a bad idea or a mind needs to be changed, convince me, whatever the truth is, let's do that. If God shows up tomorrow, I'd want to know that. Let's go figure that out. Whatever the truth is, let's pursue that with everything we've got.
Indeed. I totally applaud that approach. My next question, we've already kind of touched on this, but I just want to explore it a little bit. When Hitch and Dawkins and Harris and Dennett had their Four Horsemen conversation, one of the things that they dealt with was, what's the end game? And I always remember Hitch saying that he didn't like the idea of religion one day being completely absent. And I think he basically just loved the idea of there still being people to argue with,
And Dawkins gave him a look of incredulity, like, what?
it was quite remarkable to see the different kind of approach there. So I'm interested to know, what do you think the end game is? Can you imagine a world without religion?
Yeah, when I think of that Hitchens line, I'm reminded of a documentary I saw called The Best of Enemies. It was about William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal, two people who despised each other. And they thrived on the conflict between them over the course of years, perhaps even decades. They were just great antagonists for each other.
I did like that documentary. Yeah.
When one died, it's like the other began to drift. They really, in some ways, thrived on the fight, on the battle, on being in the crusade. And when they lost the enemy to fight against, something in them died as well. And I always thought that was an analogy. Maybe that is what Hitch was saying. It keeps him in the game. It keeps him out there swinging for the fences. For me, the end game, I know religion will never go away. This is anyone who says that, first of all, they think that religion will ever completely be defeated. This is a bizarre fantasy that has no root in reality. Or that a religion-free world would then be a conflict-free and perfect world. That's just crazy thinking as well. I mean, I don't know. I've seen a few people who say, if we want to get rid of all of our problems, just get a religion. Well, those few people may be well-intentioned.
You've already said that being an atheist doesn't make you a humanist.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you will never get rid of human nature. And there are just some naturally awful people on the planet. And this is with us. This is part of the human condition. But I'd like to see religion more marginalized to the point where it's It's not the
contained.
mainstream where the word atheist is said without people blinking and blanching, where people are, at least if nothing else, if not atheists, giving themselves permission to ask questions and to live their own lives on their own terms. That's always, whenever I meet someone and they tell me they're an atheist or a God believer or whatever they happen to say, my first question usually is, did you come to that on your own terms? Was it your family faith, or how did you get there? And the people that tell me that they're on their own journey, I'm like, good for you. Yeah, as long as your journey belongs to you and you're taking it on your terms, that's an important step for me. And I'm involved myself in a lot of social causes. I'm not one of those people that thinks that atheists have to be involved socially in the world. But the truth is, atheism speaks to what I don't believe. I don't believe in God. Dale McGowan once said that atheism is the first step and humanism is the 1,000 steps that follow. So great. Now I've rejected all the bad ideas that superstition force-fed me for 30 years. Now what? What are you going to do about it? Well, now I want to be a part of positive change. I want to help people. Well, that means fighting for equality and understanding and fighting for healthy notions of human sexuality and fighting for rights and helping to undo some of the injustice in the world. When you're not hamstrung by these superstitious ideas, you realize that superstition is out there damaging people. It's easy for me, and I think people like me, to say, well, let's go out and let's bang the drum, man, and let's try to help the better ideas defeat the bad ones. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to see a more just, a more equal, a more, in some ways, tolerant, a more free and a more rational world in the years and decade ahead.
I agree. I honestly struggle to think exactly what the world would look like, in my ideal world. I agree with what you're saying about it being marginalized. I'm not, again, entirely sure what it would look like, but I just know that the status quo is untenable and that things need to change. And for example, in my own case, the religion of my birth is printing magazines that are telling my family to shun me and to not even read emails from me, and at the same time claiming tax breaks and even charitable status in the UK. Jehovah's Witnesses are a charity, so I just know that that's completely wrong, and there's a long way to go before I can even start thinking about, what's the ideal scenario, if that makes sense.
What I'd be interested in is to see, like, so many of the traditions that we see and enjoy, and I wrote about this in Sacred Cows, is the traditions are often rooted in some sort of a mystical or superstitious or religious notion. But then you see people like secular Jews who enjoy the traditions.
Yeah.
They enjoy tradition in this way as a framework for living. I think it'd be interesting to see many of the traditions that we do and enjoy, and I think have merit. I think we are people who like ritual. Human beings enjoy structure and ritual. I'd like to see how all these structures and rituals might play out, absent of the idea of gods and devils and heaven and hell and holy books and taking all the stuff literally, but doing it as a practice, as a framework for the human condition. I think that would be an interesting experiment.
Absolutely. I'm interested in, I often, well, not often, but occasionally I think about whether there's any elements of Jehovah's Witness culture that are salvageable sans the belief in the governing body. So in other words, the music, for example, some of the songs and the melodies are very, very moving and stirring emotionally, intentionally so, because that's what keeps you roped in. But if you completely eviscerate the harmful elements of the religion and the governing body is no longer on the scene, can you derive beauty just from those nice elements? So like you, I'm intrigued to see what future generations are able to salvage, if anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so out of the many, this is a good one, out of the many conversations and experiences you've had on the Thinking Atheist, what stands out as the most memorable?
Oh, God. I'm one of those people, by the way, oh, God, oh, my God, Jesus Christ. I use this language. And people are like, why would an atheist do that? And I'm like, they're expressions.
I won't hold you to it. That's fine.
I don't know that I have anyone. I'm fortunate. Every show that I do, most of the shows that I do have a different theme. So when anyone listens in, they know what they're in for. It's not show 444. It's, this week we're going to talk about the Jehovah's Witnesses. And 2 weeks ago we talked about, like we just released a show about the secular, the godless millennial. What's a millennial? How do you define the generation? Do they fit the stereotype? What about the lack of religiosity among millennials? We've done shows about all these various religions. I interviewed Peter H. Gilmore, who was the high priest of the Church of Satan on 1 October around Halloween a few years ago. That was big fun for me. What was interesting is, I was raised to be terrified of Satanism. And then I realized after looking into the tenets of Satanism that I actually have more in common with Satanism than I do the average Baptist church.
Sure.
I've had the opportunity to speak with amazing people. I got to talk with Carolyn Porco. They just finished the Cassini mission to Mars, and NASA's celebrating that. And she helped to spearhead and be a key part of that mission. I've had a chance to speak with John Delancey, who played Q on Star Trek. He is a secular person. And I got to speak with the father of David Miscavige, Ron Miscavige, the father of the head of the Church of Scientology. We talked about his escape at the age of 80 from the church. To hear the stories of just everyday people who, they busted out and they got out and they just want to live honest lives, whatever the cost. And they reach out to the show for some kind of connection, either to get encouragement or to encourage me, the host. All of those things and more, I make it impossible to pin down any one show, any one experience. For me, it really is the sum of all of its parts together. And it's been a real privilege to be able to do it. And I'll keep kicking as long as people keep listening. So.
I'm sure they will. It's very much like you're on a journey, and your listeners are on that journey with you, and just seeing wherever it'll go,
Now I always say they look up to people like, the great philosophers and the great cosmologists and the great thinkers. I'm not an astrophysicist, man. I'm just a guy who busted out of the religion, and I'm trying to, figure it out day to day. But one upside to that is while they look up to all these PhD types, they relate to me. I'm just the guy. I'm the neighbor. I'm the guy across the street. I'm the buddy. I'm the guy you have a coffee or beer with. I'm the dude whatever the truth is, I'm just trying to figure it out. Let's take the journey and encourage each other along the way. And I think that really connects with people. People seem to have really responded to that.
Do you think this is not one of my scripted questions? Do you think that sometimes there can be kind of, maybe resentment's a strong word, but maybe frustration that some of the luminaries in the movement, some of those who really, really have the education and know what they're talking about, sometimes they can be unapproachable. And I say that as someone who struggles to be approachable himself. I mean, the amount of emails I just don't have time to answer. I'm sure you're the same. Do you ever kind of wonder whether there's any way that we could make these people more accessible to just the average Joe?
Well, I think it really depends on the person. I mean, it's like Richard Dawkins, right? He's always the name everybody goes to. I've interviewed him 3 times. And he's pawed at everywhere he goes. But, he's, for lack of a better word, he's kind of a shy guy. He's very British and he's very reserved. He's not like... it's not like R and Raw. Hey, R, and how's it going? Great to see you. Let's go out and hang out. He's just not that guy. He just never has been. We took an elevator ride once at the hotel at an event in Toronto, and it was like the most uncomfortable 30 seconds of my life. And we know each other, but it's like we're both just standing there totally silent. I can understand how some might think that, these types of sort of very erudite, educated types are unapproachable. But, at the same time, I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson at an event a few years ago, and there was a huge line after his speaking event, and he stayed up for hours standing in line. He treated everybody he shook hands with like they were the center of the universe. And so I think it really depends on the people. I think we do, though, have to forgive a little bit those who aren't quite as public, who it's harder for them, who are pawed at everywhere they go. They can't show their face anywhere without someone saying, hey, sign my book or take the selfie, or because they have almost no time to themselves, for themselves, to be themselves. And many people don't do they're better speakers, presenters, authors, researchers, scientists, philosophers than they are people person. And so for them, it really is work. It's something that at the end of the day, I mean, I'm exhausted at the end of the day. I'm smiling, but I'm toast. For somebody it's harder socially, I can imagine that they They really must carry that kind of as almost kind of a burden sometimes. They do the best they can. I think we have to be a little more forgiving and understand they're doing what they can. And, if they can give you their time, wonderful.
Indeed. And also just the sheer volume of people who want a piece of them, like you say. If there's one thing that I really wish, if there's a wish I could sort of make come true, well, there's lots of wishes I'd like to come true, but I often think it would be fantastic if he was still alive to show up with a bottle of Johnny Walker Black to the Washington DC apartment of Hitch and sit down and enjoy some time with him. But even if he was still alive, there's thousands of other people that want to do exactly the same thing, and it's just not going to happen, So
I think if they're taken away or they don't have the time, fine. Now, if someone is genuinely cross or rude to another person in public, I find that distasteful and really inexcusable. I mean, if you're a public figure, you are, to a degree, and this is debatable, I know, but I think if you are a public figure, you are a steward of the good faith and goodwill of your audience. And, it's not that you owe them all of your time, but don't be a jerk. They'll, for what is just a glib, flippant jab out of your mouth that takes 2 seconds, for them, they'll carry with them as their impression of you for the rest of their lives. And I've always tried to be a good steward of the audience and the viewers and the community for that reason, because I know that they are the reason my work exists. They're the reason the show is a top-rated show. They're the reason that I'm able to go out and do what I love, and they are in many ways family. And so I've always tried to make a point to remember that and always be a good steward of that.
That's quite good advice. I know that in my situation, we all have bad days, don't we? And we all have days where the stress of what we're doing kind of gets on top of us. And it's at those moments when we're at our weakest and someone says something or a message comes through or whatever, and you really kind of have to take a breath and sometimes and kind of compose yourself. But it is so important, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, you do what you can do. I think we're all human, but I think when we make a mistake or something slips out of our mouths that wasn't quite right, you just go back and try to make it right.
Exactly. I think being able to say sorry is a good skill.
You know what? I had a rough day. I did that once online a while back, and somebody had done something, and I typed in some snark, and afterwards, of course, and the nature of the internet is escalation. And immediately I realized, and I think I said something to the lines of, you know what, that was really uncalled for. You caught me at a bad moment. I hope you'll forgive me and understand this was not the best of me. And I hope that you'll give me another chance to re-engage. And the temperature of our discussion totally changed. I mean, you saw that it was almost like the scriptures came true, a soft answer turns away wrath kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, it's true. It just is. In like everyday life, like with my wife and everything, I'm quite good at apologizing if I'm caught out doing something bad, and the same's true with my public activism. But I will add the caveat though that the sinking feeling that you get once you're caught out, once you realize that you've goofed up, is infinitely greater once you're goofing up potentially in front of hundreds or thousands of people.
And the internet never forgets.
Dynamic to it. Oh yeah, totally.
The internet has an eternal memory, and the internet can be extremely cruel. It can be extremely cruel, and so it's a minefield. And for any public figure, where there is light, there is heat. Where there are people who admire and appreciate and follow your work, you'll find other people who would love to see you trip and fall and crash and burn. And, we exist as best we can in that environment and try to be the best people we can for the best reasons. So,
absolutely. So we're rounding on my last two questions, and then you're free to go. If you could get one message across to Jehovah's Witnesses who might have stumbled on this interview, what would it be?
Be curious. Don't be afraid to be curious. Ask questions. The minute someone tells you that a question is off limits, make that the very next question you ask. The minute they tell you there is a person you cannot criticize, make that the very first person you analyze. We live in a culture, and Christianity is very much the same way, where doubt is framed as a sin. And sometimes questions bring with them doubt, or vice versa. They're sometimes companions. Doubt is framed as a sin, it's a weakness, it's an attack. But as we often see in our regular lives, doubt is actually often a really helpful tool for protecting us. If somebody comes to your child's school and says, "Hey, get in my car," a stranger, your child doubts the validity of that person's claim that they're going to take them home. That doubt actually protected them. If you walk up to a used car salesman who wants to make you the deal of the century and you doubt it, it may have protected you from getting scammed. Doubt sometimes is a helpful tool for determining whether something is true. So give yourself permission to doubt and give yourself to challenge and ask questions. And if that question brings back 2 more questions, ask those. Go down the rabbit hole. Follow the trail of evidence wherever it leads. A curious life, I am convinced, can be the most fulfilled life, because it is there that we make discovery. We discover things that we did not know before. We become learners and participants in our world, and we refuse to assume what someone else tells us, to take on faith or to just carry forward because we are expected to by our institutions and our families. Be curious, remain curious, live a curious life. That's the best piece of advice I can give to you.
Very well said, Seth. And I asked that question with full knowledge that there will inevitably be some who need to hear that. And
honestly, I think if I was a person who was selling truth with the capital T, I would encourage my audience, my flock, my family, my kids, whoever, to ask questions, to be curious, because I would have every confidence that no matter how many questions they ask, the evidence would always bring them home to the truth that I know is true. If the Jehovah's Witness theology is tremendously sound and irrefutably true, the church should welcome challenge and curiosity and questions, because it would then know that no matter where you go, who you talk to, what you uncover, you'll always come back to the church. And if the church does not feel that way, I believe it really betrays some insecurities about the church's true position. And you should be suspicious. Find out for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That actually takes me back to what we were saying earlier about our parents, because especially now that I'm a father, and I understand what it means to kind of love a child. I just cannot imagine ever saying goodbye to that child and saying, "You and I can't talk to each other now because you believe something different." If I believed I had the absolute truth, I would be saying, bring it, bring your absolute worst, because I know I've got the truth. So I can't quite figure out why that's not my dad's attitude. And like you say, it kind of implies quite a lot of insecurity.
I agree.
Yeah. So final question, and it's a relatively easy one. Do you have anything to plug, or what can we look forward to on the Thinking Atheist?
I've written a couple of books. For those who are curious about my deconversion experience, I did write a book called Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason. And then there's a follow-up from a couple of years ago called Sacred Cows, a lighthearted look at belief and tradition around the world, illustrated by Vince DePorter, which is more of a kind of a funny and crazy romp around some of the weirdest beliefs and practices. I had an agenda with Sacred Cows, and that is that by drawing a circle around some of the more fringy cults and cultures out there, I could sort of subtly and not so subtly draw a line back to these mainstream religions like Christianity and Catholicism and Islam, and say, you know what, there's really not a whole lot of difference. The window dressing's different, but the cult speak and the practices are quite often rooted in the same insanity. So I've got that, and mostly I would encourage you to listen to the radio show. You can go to thethinkingatheist.com, or I'm hosted on Blog Talk Radio. You can just Google search The Thinking Atheist Podcast. We're up to almost 350 shows, and every week it's just kind of a new thing, a new theme, a new adventure, a new topic, a new item to talk about. It's a show that's laced with, I think, good humor and compassion, hopefully really good information, a lot of good special guests, and Coming up here toward October, I'm getting set for an annual tradition. We do ghost stories every year, a highly produced show where we prove that, yes, atheists can enjoy fantasy. We can enjoy even spirits in the supernatural in the fictional context, and we can enjoy the spooks and frights and delights of Halloween together. So that's coming up in the month of October. thethinkingatheist.com. You'll find everything right there.
Fantastic. And for those who struggle with typing in thethinkingatheist.com for any reason, I will put as many links as I can in the description to this video. But Seth, thank you so much for joining me.
It's an honor. Thanks for all the work you do, and you're making a difference, and it's been a real joy to be a part of it.
Fantastic. And to all of you who have enjoyed, hopefully, this interview, please don't forget to subscribe for similar interviews. And as always, thank you for watching.